If you were ever an angsty millennial, chances are, at some point you found solace and inspiration in the 2001 Jake Gyllenhaal classic, Bubble Boy.
You want $500? I want $500!
I mean, Donnie Darko. Indeed, the story of the disaffected teen grappling with the end of the world spoke to the 2000s coming-of-age experience like few others could. While one might attribute its immense popularity to the mind-bending time travel lore and creepy rabbit suit, I'd argue the film is at its most interesting when analyzed through a sociological lens. In fact, I think the sci-fi elements are so impactful in part because they function as a potent contrast to the film's masterful portrayal of 80s upper-middle-class suburbia. At its core, Donnie Darko is about two outcasts searching for authenticity in a world drowning in superficiality. The more vividly the stifling social order is depicted, the more the sci-fi elements resonate as a satisfying form of escapism. The 80s conservative revivalism depicted in the movie is well documented in cinema, but Donnie Darko shows us something unique. While many films criticizing the moral majority era paint its adherents as card-carrying ideologues, Donnie Darko shows us that it isn't belief alone that fuels moralizing zeal. No, there's something else at play, something much more self-serving. So let's talk about moral crusades. Why do people love to impose their values on others? Why is it so appealing to the citizens of Middlesex? And what does it say about us if we find meaning in Donnie heroically calling out their hypocrisy? Well, to find out, we're going to have to dive deep into the story of Frank the Giant Rabbit, and also talk a little bit about the sociology of drunk people. Let's dive in. But first, a quick recap. 16-year-old Donnie Darko narrowly escapes death when a mysterious jet engine crashes through his room, but luckily, he was asleep on a golf course, having been led there by a vision of a giant rabbit named Frank, who warns him that the world will end in 28 days. Donnie continues to see visions of Frank, who tells him about time travel and inspires him to commit acts of vandalism like flooding the school and axing a statue. Things start to look up for Donnie when he starts dating a new student, Gretchen Ross, who recently moved to escape her violent stepfather. Hoping to make sense of his visions, Donnie consults his teacher, Mr. Monotov, who introduces him to theories of time travel and lends him a mysterious book authored by a local shut-in, Roberta Sparrow. With only an hour before the world ends, Donnie takes Gretchen to see Roberta Sparrow when Gretchen's tragically hit by a car driven by the real Frank. Donnie kills Frank and realizes that in order to save Gretchen and his family, he must fix an unstable timeline by traveling back to the night of the jet engine crash and allowing it to kill him. Donnie's sacrifice erases the events of the Tangent universe and restores reality to its natural order. The end. Some of the most compelling stories depict characters living through a time of historical transition. Tony Soprano lives through the last gasps of the mob era.
You know, the heyday, the golden age, or whatever of the mob, that's gone.
Amadeus portrays music's shift from aristocratic patronage to the world of public concert halls. Singin' in the Rain portrays Hollywood's transition to the sound era, etc. Donnie Darko shows us something similar, the waning days of Reagan-era conservatism and the rise of a younger, more socially liberal generation. The film is set against the backdrop of the 1988 presidential election, when Bush Sr. sought to carry forward the torch of Reagan's moral revivalism against Michael Dukakis' progressive alternative.
I'm voting for Dukakis.
Donnie's sister embodies this emerging liberalism among the young. She's sexually active before marriage, always talking to her boyfriend on the phone and coming home late. She asserts her independence.
Regret that.
My husband's paycheck?
And gets accepted to Harvard.
I'm going to Harvard.
Donnie too undermines the prevailing conservative order, not only through his general disdain for authority, but also through his association with transgressive media. During the iconic man-suit scene, Donnie and Gretchen are watching The Evil Dead, which was so controversial in its time that it was initially rated NC-17 in the US and temporarily banned in the UK. And instead of wholesome television like Highway to Heaven or Growing Pains, Donnie thirsts after Christina Applegate in Married with Children.
I just turned down the volume and think about fucking Christina Applegate.
a sitcom specifically designed as a parody of shows promoting traditional family values. While on the other side of the generational divide, Mr. Darko stays up muttering at Dukakis. But Mr. Darko is probably more of a financial conservative.
Because half of your husband's paycheck goes to the federal government.
The Reagan-era moral project is most strongly associated with the PE teacher, Mrs. Farmer.
Nobody cares about responsibility, morality, family values.
And Jim Cunningham, the suave creator of the Controlling Fear program, which is really just moral majority dogma wrapped in self-help packaging.
They surrender their bodies to the temptation and destruction of drugs, alcohol, and premarital sex.
Mrs. Farmer is hell-bent on spreading the gospel of Jim Cunningham. She pays him to lead school assemblies and teaches the kids to reduce all of life's complexities to a question of love or fear. She sports a God is awesome shirt, says the word pray a lot, and attributes Donnie's mom's parenting struggles to a lack of righteousness.
Our paths through life must be righteous. I urge you to go home and look in the mirror.
Oh, and also she says the best line in the movie.
Sometimes I doubt your commitment to sparkle motion.
But it would be a mistake to think that Farmer and Cunningham are driven by religious conviction or a sincere desire to improve the lives of others. No, what the film reveals is that these moral crusades are often a desperate bid to maintain status in response to perceived threats to one's style of living. And in order to understand how, we're gonna have to talk a little bit about the temperance movement. But before we do, I want to tell you about this video's sponsor, Vessi Waterproof Shoes. I kicked off the new year with a promise to see more nature, and that means navigating slushy streets, rain, puddles, and mud for a large part of the year. But with my Vessi Alta high tops, my feet stay dry and comfortable. The winters here are long, dark, and look like this, so these 100% waterproof shoes have been a game changer. Now I don't have to worry about wet, freezing socks when I'm miles away from my apartment. Plus, I don't have to deal with the bulkiness of traditional boots. The breathable design keeps my feet relaxed and ready for anything. Whether it's at the beach, on the streets, or in the gym, they're perfect for all occasions and very durable, which is great because I hate shopping and really don't want to have to replace my shoes every season. Vessi is made for the long haul, saving me time and money. So embrace every rainy day in 2025 with Vessi. Shop now at vessi.com/JaredBauer for shoes that are as versatile as your New Year's plans, and enjoy an instant 15% off your first purchase at checkout. And now, back to the show. In 1963, sociologist Joseph Gusfield published Symbolic Crusade, an analysis of the temperance movement of the early 20th century. The temperance movement was a social reform effort advocating for less or outright no alcohol consumption. But rather than reformers being primarily motivated by morality or public health, Gusfield's analysis revealed that it was much more about an old social elite feeling threatened by the declining dominance of their values and attempting to inflict their morality on people as a way of maintaining a sense of prestige, or what he called coercive reform. See, the older Federalist aristocracy, sensing that they were losing political and social dominance to the increasingly powerful middle class, used the temperance movement as an effort to re-establish control, to redirect the changing distribution of prestige, and to hinder creeping cultural change by deeming it immoral. It's the same thing we see happening in Donnie Darko. The Mrs. Farmers and Jim Cunninghams of the world, what Gusfield would dub a status group, are keenly aware that conservative culture is losing ground to a more permissive and individualistic ethos. In response, they try to wield morality as a blunt instrument to bludgeon people with, in an effort to make their value system universal and shore up a potential loss of status. It's less about saving others and more about saving themselves. To accomplish this, a status group will elevate their own behavior against a despised group who is beneath them, or what Gusfield calls a contrast group. And in Middlesex, the contrast group is embodied by the two younger teachers, Miss Pomeroy and Mr. Monitoff. Contra Mrs. Farmer's uptight puritanism, Miss Pomeroy encourages the students' budding sexuality.
Sit next to the boy you think is the cutest.
Quiet!
And challenges the students with subversive literature.
What is Graham Greene trying to communicate with this passage?
In response, Mrs. Farmer launches an all-out witch hunt against Miss Pomeroy, ridiculing her higher education.
Excuse me, you need to go back to grad school.
And accusing her of corrupting the children by teaching The Destructors by Graham Greene.
I want to know why this filth is being taught to our children.
The Destructors follows a group of boys who destroy a house not out of malice, but as a statement against authority, not unlike Donnie, who floods the school, acts as the school statue, and burns down Jim Cunningham's house as a similar critique of the status quo. Mrs. Farmer calls the story pornographic,
That pornography is being taught in our curriculum.
labels Miss Pomeroy a degenerate, and ultimately gets her fired. Mr. Monotov too represents this encroaching, secular, permissive social group. He lends Donnie a book about potentially blasphemous things like theoretical physics, but ultimately has to toe the line.
I'm not going to be able to continue this conversation. Why? I could lose my job.
Per Gusfield, maintaining status isn't only about prizing the behavior of your own social group, but also in denigrating the behavior of the culture that threatens your sense of prestige. In his words, it's not just about keeping up with the Joneses, it's also about getting away from the Smiths. And this is nothing new. He talks about how in the 16th century, the Lollardists in England prohibited drinking, gambling, and sports specifically because they were the favorite activities of the upper class Catholics who they hated. And it's the same thing today. This is totally anecdotal, but in my personal life, it seems like a lot of the people that I know well form their politics in opposition to the people in their life who they find most annoying. Anyway, the important thing about these moral crusades is that they're often done through entirely symbolic rather than instrumental behavior. Basically, it's all about posturing, not actually changing anything. Jim Cunningham's ridiculous Overcoming Fear program is a clear example of this because it's obvious nonsense. Whenever a student comes to him with a problem,
how can I find out what I want to be when I grow up?
He just spouts an inane platitude about embracing love.
Find what it is in the world that makes you feel love. Pure, unconditional love. And go to that.
When Donnie calls him out, he's pointing to the fact that his advice is void of anything actionable.
I want your sister to lose weight, tell her to get off the couch, stop eating Twinkies, and maybe go out for field hockey. You're sick of some jerk shoving your head down the toilet. Well, you know what? Maybe you should lift some weights or take a karate lesson, and the next time he tries to do it, you kick him in the balls.
Because Jim Cunningham's program isn't about enacting change. It's purely symbolic. It's about labeling everything outside of his personal value sphere and everything in alignment with them love in an effort to enhance the symbolic properties of the conservative movement to make it sound prestigious in a time when self-help is on the rise and impose it on the young. This is why he gets paid so much. He provides a comforting narrative to a community that feels its values slipping away, rekindling their confidence through pure symbolism. Gusfield talks about how people who are passionate about moral issues often only care about the symbolic victories. For example, he charts how groups will be really happy when laws are passed that reflect their values, even if the execution of the act contradicts the intent of the legislation. Because turns out when you strip away the symbolic posturing, the reality of the Middlesex parents is not so righteous. The moms who are on the surface enthusiastic about Cunningham promoting sexual abstinence actually only care because they think he's hot.
Rose, you have got to meet this Jim Cunningham. I can't believe he's single.
Sparkle Motion, the all-girls dance group that Donnie's little sister leads, is purportedly about promoting excellence, but just a few seconds of watching a performance reveals it's clearly creepy. And of course, Jim Cunningham, the beacon of wholesome values, is exposed as a PDF file who's got a veritable dungeon of gross stuff. Gusfield mentions how the hypocrisy of these symbolic crusades was once identified by Marx, who was extremely skeptical about bohemianism because to him, it emphasizes and pays homage to the very same false values by exaggerated protest against them. This is the appeal of Jim Cunningham. You can satisfy your urge to thirst after a Hollywood hunk, but in a way that makes you feel like you're renouncing those very desires. That's why casting Patrick Swayze in this role is chef's kiss good. At this tension between the community's purported values and the actual ones is perhaps the most underrated character in the film, Donnie's mom. She dresses up like the other moms in Middlesex and goes through the prescribed motions of raising righteous rich kids, but there's always a sense that she doesn't know if she's doing the right thing. She defers to the expertise of Donnie's psychiatrist despite his protest about pills. She clashes with Kitty, reluctantly brings their daughter to the dance competition, but at the end of the film, when reeling at Donnie's death, we see her smoking a cigarette, finally dropping the facade of the perfect suburban mom, finally questioning it all. Thus, what our heroes Gretchen and Donnie are ultimately rebelling against isn't just a value system that they disagree with, but a form of inauthenticity, a moral program with only symbolic aspirations. But how does the film characterize the more authentic alternative? Donnie and Gretchen initially connect because they both experience pain in life. Gretchen moved to Middlesex after her stepdad stabbed her mom, and Donnie struggles with mental health problems.
He has emotional problems.
Oh, I have those too. What kind of emotional problems does your dad have?
Gretchen and Donnie even decide to bone after her mom goes missing, cause I guess mutual recognition of sadness is a turn on. Donnie always walks around with a sense of detached dissatisfaction on his face and is so unconcerned with consequences that he has the balls to tell Mrs. Farmer to, well.
He asked me to forcibly insert the lifeline exercise card into my anus.
Miss Pomeroy, too, despite her youth, is characterized as jaded and weary, a noble sufferer in contrast to Mrs. Farmer, who's always way too perky. The film's climax even revolves around Donnie sacrificing himself so that Gretchen, his mom, and his sister can live. There's a sense that the good characters see through all the symbolic posturing around them and make the actually righteous choices because they've endured and been chastened by suffering. And I think this is a big reason why Donnie Darko resonated with my generation. By romanticizing Donnie's angst, the movie allows viewers to interpret their own pain as a badge of honor, as a mark of depth and authenticity. It invites the audience, many of whom feel alienated, misunderstood, or disillusioned, to think that, like Donnie, those qualities set them apart from and above the superficial masses. But it's worth asking, is this function of the film not also a kind of status project? If the temperance movement and moral revivalism provided adherents a flattering sense of identity by contrasting them with a less noble other, then Donnie Darko constructs a similar dichotomy on behalf of its viewers, the noble sufferers who raw dog a harsh reality versus the shallow participants in a symbolic crusade. The film critiques the shallow symbolic order of conservative society only to replace it with its own mythology, one that frames suffering as redemptive and those who suffer as occupying an elevated level of consciousness. Donnie Darko is a fascinating example of how a film can simultaneously condemn a social community for promoting a symbolic crusade while also functioning as a rallying cry for a new one. Revisiting the film decades later, Gusfield's assertion that yesterday's moral virtue is today's ridiculed fanaticism now resonates on two levels. Not only can we join Donnie in mocking 80s moral puritanism, but today we can also apply the same skepticism to the figure of the noble alienated suburbanite. Because truth is, pain is often completely arbitrary and has no redemptive qualities. It just hurts. But ultimately, we all take part in some kind of symbolic crusade. As Gusfield said, we live in a forest of symbols, and the worst thing we can do is think we live without relying on symbols as powerful tools of communication. Because the things we're passionate about, whether it be movies or political projects, resonate not only because they align with our ideals, but also because of their symbolic function, to provide a favorable lens of self-understanding. And that's just part of living life in the man suit. Hey y'all, thanks for watching. Don't forget to get 15% off waterproof shoes at Vessi.com/JaredBauer. Also, be sure to subscribe because the next video is on Memento. Hope you guys are having a great start of the year, and as always, peace.